welcome. I'm so glad you could join us today, and thank you again for your flexibility last week as winter weather forced us to hit pause. We really appreciate you being here. I'm Angela, republicEn's Engagement Director. Here at republicEn.org, we work to build conservative-led climate solutions through real conversations, just like this one. Before we get started, I want to share why today's conversation exists at all. During our year-end appeal, we made a promise. If we reached our fundraising goal, we'd host a live Ask Me Anything with Bob. You guys came through, thank you, and this webinar is the direct result of that challenge. So again, thank you for helping make this conversation possible. Since today's theme is spilling the tea, I thought we'd start with a couple of low-risk revelations, and just to be clear, by spilling the tea, we mean candid insight, the good stuff that usually stays off the slides. So who are today's webinar guests? Bob Inglis is republicEn's executive director and a former Republican congressman for South Carolina. Bob starts every single morning with a bowl of oatmeal. Same breakfast every day for what, Bob? 20 or 30 years?
Since 1981.
Oh,
No, since 80,
all
maybe.
right. So closer to like 45, 50 years. But here's why the oatmeal actually matters. Let's be honest, oatmeal is not glamorous. Bob stuck with climate leadership even when it cost him politically. Conservative climate leadership often means choosing discipline over applause and substance over slogans. It's doing the right thing even when it's not rewarded immediately. And to me, that's oatmeal energy. Now, Chelsea, on the other hand, is republicEn's director of editorial content and host of our podcast, The Eco Right Speaks, which literally just debuted its 12th season a few hours ago. So when I get a chance, I'll drop a link to that in the chat for anybody that's interested. Chelsea's secret is that she was a cheerleader as a teenager, which may explain how she manages to keep complicated conversations moving and people engaged at the same time. And if you check out the chat, you'll find my evidence there. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to cheerleader Chelsea to get us started. Thanks, guys.
You forgot to mention the fantastic 80s hair in that photo. And Bob, I was just thinking, if we ever solve climate change, maybe the oatmeal lobby can hire you to be their spokesperson.
Yeah, there you go. It was the answer to our budgetary crisis in law school, So back then it was less than 4 cents a serving. Then Quaker proved the health claims, and then it turned out to be 8 cents a serving. It was really quite a change.
You were onto something early, which I think is very typical of you. Anyway, thank you all for being here today. The last time Bob and I sat in conversation like this was in person, which is much more fun, but we're going to make do with our little fireside chat today. And Bob, I wanted to ask, just to sort of set the tone and get things started, pull out your crystal ball, or in this case, maybe it is like the tea leaves at the bottom of the teacup that fortune tellers look at, and tell us what you think is in store for climate policy in 2026.
Well, first, true confessions, I didn't know what spill the tea meant. I had heard of spill the beans, but I think it was Wynn who insisted, no, it's spill the tea. So spill the tea. That means,
It is what the kids say, definitely.
Yes, Chelsea, the big picture. Here's where I think we are. The chances for action on climate really are impacted by the meta environment. What's going on around in the rest of the political policy world. And so right now, I think what we're seeing is 1 year into the second Trump administration, we're seeing some real signs that maybe things could be different in 26 than they were in 25. In 25, basically Donald Trump was riding quite high. Now his polling numbers aren't looking so good. The generic ballot test favors the Democrats. We've seen Republicans lose in some places they weren't supposed to lose. Most recently, the Texas state Senate race, where Donald Trump won by 17 points and a Democrat just got elected in that state Senate district. And so there are some real warning signs for Republicans. Now, that would normally be, I got on the one hand, on the one hand, that's good news for us in the climate space because maybe we'll start seeing Republicans start acting like themselves and representing their districts. And what that would lead them to do is say, hey, we've got a lot of opportunities here in this district or that district. Here in South Carolina, for example, we've got solar panel manufacturing, we've got battery manufacturing, we got some exciting stuff going on. And so maybe state reps or U.S. reps from South Carolina will start representing their districts and their state. So there's some good thing that could come of that. On the other hand, there's something we need to be very careful about, and that is, and this is where the nuance is really important. When a tribe is under pressure, they sort of expect conformity within that tribe, and they circle the wagons. And so if it looks like Donald Trump's stock is going like so, then there may be this other countervailing thing, which is circle around the wagons, protect us. So it's a delicate little dance here we've got to do in 26. And but generally what it means is we got to stay with what our affect always will be, and that is to welcome people to the conversation. Welcome conservatives and say, hey, this is your thing. Really, it's your thing. You're very good at this. So anyway, that's the meta environment.
Okay, that's the meta problem. And then our dear longtime friend John Sweeney had posed a question. I haven't looked to see whether John is on today, but he, related to that question, is wondering if there are any small victories in U.S. climate legislation that you see as being possible in this year 2026 within that context that you just described.
Yeah, in fact, one of them is just happened. It's really pretty exciting. Kevin Cramer's Prove It Act, which basically requires the federal government to do an analysis of carbon emissions out of products here in America compared to products made elsewhere. That got it incorporated into report language. It's not technically in the law, but it does require some work by the federal government to produce this report. That's the result not just of Kevin Cramer, but also our good friend John Curtis doing some great work on that when he was still in the House, making it possible to prepare the way for this. And it really is an example of how just hanging in there and being smart about it is what John Curtis and Kevin Cramer did to get this done. So that's an exciting development. Another one that I might mention is some real progress on small modular reactors. There's some real movement there. I think with the pressure to build more data centers, there's also a pressure to maybe try to figure out how to power them with clean energy. And so the small modular reactor thing may be moving with real money behind it. And then also there's always the hope of permitting reform. So all of those things are wins that are possible in 2026. And one of them is already, and that's the Prove It Act is already here.
Yeah, and the one that I would just add is I was on a webinar a few weeks ago where Abigail Ross Hopper, the CEO of SIA, the solar industry group, was the guest speaker. And she actually said there has not been a dramatic fall off on solar since the repeal of the solar tax credits in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So I think clean energy is here to stay. people know its value, especially as what you said with the data centers. And to that point, everybody has kind of their own motivation, right? I got solar panels because I felt like I had to kind of walk the talk a little bit. My next car will certainly be an EV. And Ed Maybach, who, for those who don't know, he is, let's call him director emeritus at the George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication, which houses republicEn.org. So he's been a longtime advocate of ours. And he asked you, Bob, in your opinion, what is the most compelling reason for America to switch from fossil fuel energy to renewable energy whenever possible?
I think the most compelling reason it's clearly the future. And you really want to be about the future. That's the strange thing right now is too many people in my party are doubling down on burning rocks, and other stuff to get out of the ground. When in fact, the world's moving on. And so you can either try to bring back some previous age, or you can say, okay, we see you. We see where you're going, China, and we're going to beat you there. We're ready to compete. And so I think the most compelling reason is, look, there are real good reasons to pursue this, and to be about this new kind of energy, with things like small modular reactors, with things like solar and wind with battery backup, so that you're advancing toward electrification with all the technological ramifications that brings, to include even things like warfare. That you're ready to defend the country, not using old technology, but the new stuff, which is going to be battery related. And so you really want to be about that technology. You don't want to be
Yeah.
doubling down on burning rocks.
And the whip, I always like your whip analogy that when the cars took over the horse and buggy, you didn't have the whip manufacturers crying for us to remain in a horse and buggy era. What you were just saying about the military, I think is interesting because, gosh, it must have been 15 years ago, 16 years ago, I was out at the Hoover Institute at Stanford for a presentation on clean energy, climate change, national security. And there was a general who made a presentation, and one of the things he showed us was it was a solar blanket, like a solar panel blanket. It folded up to be about the size of a notebook. And he served in Iraq, and he was like, it is really dangerous for us to transport liquid fuels. And
Yeah.
so having something like this where we can use it to fire, to power a computer or power our logistics tent or whatever is necessary, because in some parts of the world, not only we might not be able to get that fuel to ourselves, but we put our own soldiers in risk with the transportation of fuels. And so yeah, I think there's so much potential in the whole clean energy economy. There's so much economic possibility. And then, technology is fun, and I think innovation is fun. And I know, Bob, you've been a longtime adopter. So why don't you tell our guests what clean energy or what renewable energy you have embraced in your personal life?
Well, let's see. We Marion and I did a little renovation of a property, of a house on family property down at the coast in South Carolina. We put on a little teeny solar system that just has 8 solar panels. We hope it can provide 42%, says the installer, of the needs of the house. Not doing so great right now because we've had it's January or February now, and the sun is real low in the sky. But come May and June, we're gonna be powering away, so that's fun. But probably our earlier the more interesting one maybe is in 2017, my wife Marianne said to me, "We got to walk the talk. I'm going to test drive a Volt, the Chevy Volt, the VOLT, not the BOLT. The VOLT is a hybrid." Um, and so she came home with said Volt, which caused our youngest to call home from college and say, "Are you all right?" Because she knew that we had never bought a new car in our lives.
Wow.
We'd always bought, like
A
Chrysler
used car.
minivans
Yep.
that have like 100,000 miles on them, need a new transmission. You can get them for like $6,000. Got to spend 2,000 on the transmission, but now you're $8,000 in a car that's going to go at least another 100,000. And so she really was sort of concerned that maybe her parents had gone nuts. But anyway, the Volt's running great, and I'm excited about Mary Barra of GM saying that they're going to go back to building that something like a Volt.
Well, I was outside earlier before this helping my neighbor get her car dug out. And my solar panels are covered, obviously, with this snowcrete, as we're calling it in the DC area, the frozen snow that we're never going to get rid of. And it's a little bit above freezing today. Plus, the sun was out. And when we were out there, we could hear it starting to slide off. We both looked like, what is that? I do not want to be underneath that when it comes down. But anyway, I digress. Is Brett Cease on our Zoom today?
I
Because I
am.
wanted to, Brett, I would love to turn it over to you for your burning tea spilling question for Bob.
Oh, this is great. Well, obviously, I speak on behalf of everyone here. I'm excited we are to hear directly from you, Bob, and I'll put it in the chat for everyone else here too. And that is just as a former member of Congress, not once, but twice, what's one piece of advice you'd give to individuals looking to build a stronger connection to their member of Congress these days, especially if they happen to be from across the aisle?
Yeah, Brett, it's what you know how to do so well at CCL. It's get to know them. That's the thing. Yeah, just get to know them. And you might think a lot of people might think, well, that's too hard to do. You can't do it. No, no, it's really possible to do. Um, of course, you could get to know them through a series of visits in Washington, but you could also get to know them at home. There's probably somebody that you know that knows them personally, some way that you can figure out a way just to get to know them. Um, you know, and Brett, there's an example of that for me that is a precursor to Citizens Climate Lobby, and that is Results, which is an organization that lobbies for foreign aid. I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House, and so they used to come see me. And the first time I remember, it was two people from Greenville, South Carolina, came to see me in D.C. And at the end of the meeting, they said, "Would it be okay if we gave you a hug?" And I said, "Sure." And so then they came about twice a year. And the meeting started with a hug and it ended with a hug. I mean, these people were just sweet people who were just asking for one thing. They said, "Give 1% of the federal budget to foreign aid." That was their constant request. I don't know that I didn't ever quite get there, but the point is that they were very they I got to know them, and I look forward to the hugs. Um, and as you know, Brett, that's where Marshall Saunders, the founder of CCL, got it from. That's what he brought to CCL, is that wonderful affect of just be nice to people. Um,
They're real people. You're all real people, right?
yeah,
It's hard to remember that. I think sometimes with social media, and it gives you a way to interact that is not as authentic, but everyone is a real living, breathing person. Some people like to hug and some don't, but getting to know your member and what their comfort level with that is, that's such great advice. And I wanted to stick with our friends on the Zoom and turn over to Matt Cahalan. Matt, I saw you weigh in on the chat to say you couldn't hear Bob earlier, so I know you're here, and hopefully you can hear us and hear Bob and post your question to our friends today.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, whatever you do worked great. I'm Matt Cahalan from Concord, New Hampshire. I'm on a quest to improve public health data in relation to climate change. And I was really happy to see Bill Gates come out and introduce a new idea and some reality into the debate. So my question for you, Bob, is in a surprise move, Bill Gates criticized or critiqued the mainstream climate music for movement for its emphasis on carbon targets over all other measures of progress. In your opinion, was he right to call out the climate alarmists' emphasis on apocalyptic climate scenarios? And do we need a policy shift towards innovation and poverty reduction over specific emissions reductions? What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag, to tell you the truth, about what Bill Gates was saying, because it did run the risk, and I think he's sort of recanted some of that because he realized he's running the risk of saying, well, we don't need climate action. Um, that's not what he was saying. What he was saying is that you got to take other things into account too. But what I would point out is new forms of energy actually could be one of the best ways to serve the world's poor. Because if we continue in a system of burning rocks or liquid rocks, then you basically have constraints on that supply, which makes the price high. And if you're poor somewhere, it's probably going to be that you're the last one that's going to be able to get those rocks or the liquid rocks. So if you could switch to something like renewables, wind and solar in your village and power it and back it up with a battery, you could light up your life. And I think we can light up places in the world with a lot more energy, a lot more freedom, a lot more mobility. And so we can actually serve the world's poor by doing that. And of course, in the big places like, Mumbai or New York City or wherever, small modular reactors that can power the whole city, that's pretty cool. And so, but out in the villages, there's real opportunities in better batteries, better solar, higher efficiency, those sorts of things. That can really help. So I think it's a both and I think that's what Bill Gates was trying to say, both and. But it does raise a bigger question for all of us, and that is, how do we describe this thing that we're about? Do we say that we're out to save the planet, or do we say that we're out to, just prosper in new kinds of technology? And I think it depends on the audience as to which one you go with as the reason. For some, particularly left of center, I think they want to hear that we're saving the planet. For some right of center, it's like, hey, we're going to make some money on this. And we're going to create jobs and create wealth here in America. And so I think it just depends. You got to listen to the audience and figure out which one to go with, because both might get you there. Either a focus on technology or a focus on the moral imperative of saving the planet.
Bob, you said the magic words that I think relate really well to a question that was submitted by a real old timer eco writer, one of the three Larrys in Texas. There might be more Larrys in Texas who support the eco right and conservative climate leadership, but Larry Howe has been a member of republicEn probably since the beginning, and he submitted this question. Regarding China's rise as an electrostate and the US global competitiveness, how can we communicate to Republican lawmakers that China's rapid rise in clean energy manufacturing is a strategic warning, and then embracing 21st century energy technologies is essential for US economic leadership and national security?
Wow, it's all
I know,
about
it's a
Larry. Larry,
and
that's
remember,
it.
we only have 34 minutes left and we still have a bunch of questions to get to. And audience, Joel, I see your hands up. Once we get through our sort of, we will open it up for questions at the end for those who didn't get a chance to submit ahead of time.
Yeah, Larry, you've got in the premise of the question is the answer, I think, which is that you lay it out, the opportunity available. Why wouldn't we be pursuing that? Why wouldn't we say, yeah, we see you, BYD. We see you. And yeah, we're behind. Ford Motor Company has admitted pretty frankly that they're behind. they're behind BYD. In fact, I just read something today from their CEO saying that he drove a BYD for a week or something, and he said it was humbling because the technology is better than what we've got. And so what do we do about that? Do we just sort of, like I say, keep on talking about going and burn some more rocks and insist on doing that, or do we and watch BYD take over the world car market? You know, um, so that's what Ford is very concerned about. And so, in the premise to your question is the answer, and it's the answer that I'm very happy that Ford Motor Company, for example, is pursuing, which is, oh yeah, we intend to compete worldwide with BYD, which is now, 50% of cars and more than half of the cars in China now are electric, and they are the largest car maker and the largest car user in the world. China is. Meanwhile, BYD is rising to double-digit market share in Europe and going up fast. And so what do we do about that? Do we sort of say, oh no, people aren't going to do that. They're not going to fly. Um, you know, um, the railroads back in the day could have become airlines. People aren't going to fly. They're going to keep on running trains. No, they flew, and you could. They had the capital. They had They were in the business of moving people. They could have been airlines. Um, we can either pretend that BYD isn't rising double digits into European markets, or we can say, "Oh, we see you, and we're going to compete." So I think it's an exciting opportunity, really, if you think about it. Let's
It
compete.
really is. Well, we're halfway through this webinar, and I think at this point we might need a little bit dose of optimism. And so I'm going to turn to Elizabeth Fenner, if Elizabeth is still on. I saw her face earlier in the gallery, to pose her question to Bob. Elizabeth.
Hi.
Hey, Elizabeth.
Hi. I think the question I want to ask today is that when I talk to Democrats, I'm in a deep blue district. The conversation always starts very heavy. They're worried, panicked, in a state of dread. Then if we switch, when we start talking about innovation and what's possible, then it completely changes. Excitement, biochar, solar, wind, batteries, nuclear, all of it is just like we could do so much more, and the world is moving ahead so much. So how do we turn that happiness into what's possible, because they don't feel anything is possible with the Republican Party. So I think the divide between the parties will even stay strong after the midterms.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, actually, what I was just talking about in answering the question about the EVs in the Chinese market from Larry. Is Wow. So you find, Elizabeth, that it turns them around, that they start to get feeling more optimistic,
Yeah.
which
But the way I see it is I see it as, so they had the IRA, the Dems had the IRA, and then we're doing things on their own that way. Say they win the House and the Senate in 26, then they're just gonna, without looking across the aisle and saying, let's do this together this time, I'm afraid they'll simply be a we won, you lost, our turn now, and it'll just be a continuing until the next swing.
yeah, and that is a problem because in order to win this, we need durable policy, and the way to make that durable is to make it bipartisan. That's just the way it is, and so. But I think what you've just shown, Elizabeth, is some research that our colleague Ed Maybach has found, or is some. What he's found is that if you increase the sense of efficacy over all six Americas, it increases engagement over all six. So from alarmed Alice, which is the people you're talking to dismissive Dan, if you just give them some sense that we can do something about it, it's not death and taxes. It's not inevitable that we're all going to die of this, um, and next Tuesday, whatever. Then everybody gets more engaged. And so I think you've just found that out in your
And
door-to-door
yeah,
campaign, apparently.
if I could just chime in there, so the Six Americas report that Bob just referenced that Mason 4C puts out every year just issued their findings that were taken from polls, nationwide polls done in November and December. And for those that are Eco Right Speaks listeners, John Kocher, who's the new Ed Maybach, although he gets credit on his own. He's a very smart researcher, professor. He'll be on the show. We launched today, so his episode will be March 3rd if you want to hear more. But the latest finding found one of the very interesting findings is that while there continues to be 5-to-1 people who accept the science of climate change and think something needs to be done to those dismissive Dans, the perception of what other people support shows a much more divisive sense of divisiveness. So Democrats are thinking, I mean, mostly I think it's coming from Democrats who are perceiving that their Republican friends are dismissive of climate change more so than they actually are. And I thought that was a really interesting finding, as well as the fact that we are all around not talking about it as much. And that includes both policymakers, which Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island, but very eager to do something bipartisan, was getting on some of his colleagues about this, that we can't just turn our backs on the issue, we have to keep going. But also the media is reporting much less on climate change than it used to. So, but the misperception thing, I think, just was so illustrated this divide that we're in right now. We're probably a lot closer than we think in a lot of ways. And so tune in on March 3rd and you can hear more about that. We have 3 more sort of scheduled questions, so to speak, or pre-submitted questions. And then I want to make sure we have plenty of time to turn to our audience because I see hands up and questions flowing in the chat. So I am going to turn the mic over to Bill Bray. Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Bob, for having this session and all you at republicEn. I've got sort of a 2-part question, and I'll put it into the chat, not surprisingly, regarding carbon pricing. But one, what is the pathway to get an economy-wide carbon price in the U.S.? And 2, what can we do as individuals about making that happen?
Yeah. Wow. So that's what that's
It's
the
a $1 million
policy.
question.
Yeah. So here's, you know, it's like this. I really do think that even though it looks impossible, it's like the financial crisis. Somebody said, it's amazing how the impossible went to the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. And I think that's what carbon pricing is. It appears impossible, but it will become inevitable without ever passing through probable. And the reason is, it's just the most obvious thing to do. You can't find an economist who would differ with that. They all say the same thing, the first and most obvious thing to do about climate change is just charge a tipping fee for dumping into the trash dump of the sky. And you have less dumping. That's the way it goes. And if you're conservatives like us, you want to pair that with a reduction in other taxes or a dividend back to the citizenry. So there's no growth of government. But then the real kicker, apply it to imports so that you get the world in on this thing. And that's, so how do we do that? I think we continue to talk to the audiences that matter. If you're left of center, I think what you need to do is try to shore up support for this. If you have an opportunity to talk to a left of center audience about carbon pricing, just beg them to do something simple like carbon tax, paired with a reduction in payroll taxes or paired with a dividend of the money back to the citizenry, so that we don't have a growth of government. and just implore them to please come back later for all that laundry list of things, your wish list of what you'd love to see in the Green New Deal or whatever. Come back later for that. Let's get this done now. That's what I'd say left of center. Right of center, I think what we've got to be saying is, you know, China is really going to eat our lunch, and we really need to get with this thing. And the way to get with it is to do the carbon border adjustment mechanism so we're sure that we've got the world in on it. And then watch the free enterprise system deliver innovation at speed and scale. That's a message that will work right of center, with the caveat that if I'm right, that Donald Trump's stock is declining and the tribe's a little bit nervous, you got to approach with real delicacy as you talk to them, right of center. But so yeah, it's about being confident that this is the policy that'll work. The other is just really, I mean, just if proof of that is go to En-ROADS, EN, and then separate roads, En-ROADS. Modeling will show that that's the case. MIT Sloan has done that, and it's a really useful tool.
I think that question and your response is a perfect lead into a question about Social Security solvency connecting to a carbon tax that Rob Begg would like to pose. So if Rob is still with us, I will let him unmute himself. Oh, hello.
Hello. Yes, and thank you, Bob. And yes, and that Bill's question was a perfect segue. I've been trying to think about what long-term climate actions might appeal to Republicans along the lines of, carbon tax. And with the pending insolvency of Social Security, even though it's a few years out, that seems like an issue that would concern a lot of voters. Would using funds from a carbon tax exclusively to help preserve Social Security and perhaps also reduce payroll taxes have some more political attractiveness to, right of center folks? I think for retirees, it probably would. Anyway,
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I think that's good thinking. For anybody on the call right now that's currently retired, of course, Social Security is fine if if you're, I don't know, 70 years old or higher, it's fine. But if you're,
56.
45 or
Yeah.
56,
Yeah.
it's a problem coming at us. And the actuaries at Social Security are apoplectic about this. And Congress will eventually act when we're on the cusp of the crisis. But you're onto something. The revenue from a carbon tax could be used in that way, and that particularly can be otherwise. Which, in order to solve Social Security's problem, you need to do one of three things, or probably a combination of all three. And I can only say this because I'm a recovering politician, not a current politician. You see, if you're in recovery, you can say things. You can increase taxes, you can reduce benefits, or you can increase the retirement age. It's probably a combination of all three of those. All of them are unpopular. So that's why Congress doesn't want to touch it. But the carbon tax could help with some of that, because then what you're doing is you're broadening the base of taxation. Right now, Bill Gates, who was referenced earlier, he pays payroll taxes probably for the first 60 seconds of 2026. He was paying payroll taxes, but he's spending money throughout 2026, and we'd be collecting carbon tax from Bill throughout the year. Flying on a corporate jet, fine, Bill, just pay the tax. And so we'd be broadening the base of taxation and making Social Security a little bit more stable. But really, to fix it, you got to do one or a combination of those three things. So, but yeah, I think that is a good point to make to conservatives: is, hey, here's a way to deal with that financial challenge that we've got that's very real about Social Security.
Thanks.
Bob, I'm going to ask our friend Allison Steele to redirect the vibe a little bit before we turn to the rest of the audience for their questions. So Allison, are you with us still?
Yep. Hi, Bob. Nice to hear from you again. Hello to everybody from Pittsburgh. We talked a little bit yesterday about how hard it is to do some of this work sometimes. And one of the important things about engaging people is to help them understand that there is hope. There can be change from their action. But in the current situation, it can be a little tough at times. So I would like to ask you where you turn for a dose of optimism and hope when you need it.
Great question. And I'd recommend it, actually. When I get discouraged in this business, I go watch President Kennedy at Rice University in September of 1962. It's the moonshot speech. And if you go to the NASA site or to the Kennedy Library, I'm about half of the views. So on the and I cry every time I watch it. It's just amazing American exceptionalism that President Kennedy describes.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
It's 17 minutes of pure American exceptionalism. He admits in the speech that some of the materials needed for these spacecraft hadn't been invented yet. No matter, we're going to the moon. Anyway, that's the, and he also says, he admits that we're behind. And that's, he says, in the space race, we're behind. And it's so encouraging to think that the American people were willing to hear that from their leader, the president of the United States at that point, to say, hey, we're behind in this space race, but we intend to make up, and we will go ahead. And of course, it happened. We did it. And of course, now we look back and say, well, of course it happened. No, it was anything but, of course, back then. It was anything but. And they did that on slide rules. They did all those calculations on slide rules. So if we did that, we can handle this thing of climate change. Really, we can. If we just decide that, this is something we can solve. And the great thing about climate change is it can be solved. Now, some of the damage is baked in, so we're going to deal with that for a while. But the underlying problem can be solved. Unlike, for example, healthcare. Problem with healthcare, 100% death rate and a lot of suffering between here and there. There's no such thing as a perfect healthcare system. But all you can do is hope to relieve some suffering. But in the case of climate, you can actually fix it. Long term, like you say, for years to come, we'll have impacts. But
individual results may vary.
Yeah. But we can solve this, and that's pretty exciting. So yeah, I'd recommend it. The moonshot speech.
Yeah.
September
Everyone's
16th.
homework. Yeah, go check it out. In fact, we'll try to drop a link to it in the chat before the end of the session. And I have just seen his face with his hand up for like the last 20 minutes. So I am going to ask Joel to come off mute and ask Bob a burning question.
Yeah, Bob, I've got two questions about messaging that I would be interested to hear you talk about. One is more practical and just like the cost of solar and batteries dropped so fast that whatever you were saying about the prices of anything a year ago is all wrong. It's just incorrect. I watched this Rosie, and she's like, oh, I read a book about the cost of solar and batteries. And, I rechecked on that and realized I'm so wrong about that because I hadn't checked all the prices lately. I mean, it used to be made out of lithium, nickel, cobalt. Now they're all made out of lithium iron. Soon they're going to be made out of sodium. And so the prices just keep falling so much. I've just about given up, and I about say 80% of it's going to be solar and batteries because it's all going to be so crazy cheap. You go, well, how's it going to get that cheap? I go, I don't know. It just falls by that much every single time. So that's one question, how you deal with changing, the changing environment. You just have to change your message so often. So I'm curious about that. Second is, some people I enjoy on the left that talk about climate throw that capitalism is the problem in sometimes. And I find that frustrating. And I'd be interested to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, those go together, don't they? Because the reason those batteries are coming down in such price is because of capitalism. And really, this is an important thing. Anybody left of center listening now, please hear this, is that the way to talk to people right of center is to talk about the power of free enterprise, to do what you were just describing. You know, that, in fact, I heard an interesting report recently on NPR. Interestingly enough, they were saying that, not many charging stations have been built under the Inflation Reduction Act. Very, very few, in fact. But meanwhile, Tesla has put out a lot of them, and so that resonates right of center, is to say, let the free enterprise system do this, because people trying to make a profit, and we think that profit is a good thing at republicen.org. Profit is really great because that means it's sustainable. That's a definition I learned from a recycler of plastic in Spartanburg, South Carolina. He says, making a profit is what makes it sustainable. So that's the definition that I take of sustainability. If you can make a profit, it's sustainable. If you can't, it is not. So what you've just described is the power of the free enterprise system. And that's a means into the hearts and minds of fellow conservatives.
We had an advocate for the EV industry on the podcast last season. I forget what episode, but he was saying that actually with the elimination of the EV tax credit, he said really much like what we heard about the solar industry a couple of weeks ago on the webinar I attended, is that it's baked in a little, people are going to keep buying these cars because they're cool. And Joel, I know you and I have talked about the fact that when you meet a skeptic, you invite them to sit in your Tesla and just see. It's fun, right? This technology is super cool. And so some of the drive to buy EVs is out there, but one thing that this association is going to be advocating for is the build out on the infrastructure so that can catch up with the number of vehicles that are on the road. So I just thought that was interesting. And if you didn't listen to that episode, I encourage you to go back and check it out. Matt, I see your hand is raised if you'd like to ask a question of Bob.
Oh, yes, I would. Thank you. You took me out of order and surprised me.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. Yeah, I was hoping for some contact recommendations on people who are active at the state level, akin to ALEC, but focused on the environmental issues. And the reason I state that specifically is that the city of Austin has a internal price on carbon, and this is not a well-known fact because a city government of this liberal nature can be at odds with Texas, but because it's an internal carbon price, it's effectively a tax on the citizenry, but it's been in place for 6 years. We now have data that show that economically it's 100% win for Texas. So essentially $170 million in coal spend was converted to $270 million of purchase from the market of cleaner energy from Texas, and then about an $800 million benefit environmentally. So that's the starting point. This was policy that I worked on when I was on the utility commission for the city. And so that's a pretty good starting point, but it's like, boy, I'm not really sure who to interact with to try and, talk about that success and then broadening it to the state level. It's a huge political lift. Mechanistically, de minimis, but again, same political lift, but Texas oriented rather than nationally oriented.
Well, Larry Howe from Plano just dropped in the chat that Conservative Texans for Energy Innovation is a statewide group.
I have spoken to them. They have not expressed a lot of courage. I'm happy to go back to them.
Yeah, they're very clean energy business focused, those Conservative Energy Network.
Well, but they're very, you still can't say carbon price out.
Right, or climate change, yeah.
Or climate change, yeah. Well, I enjoyed them. I applaud their efforts, but this little policy avenue they're not keen on yet.
Yeah.
Yet, I say yet.
Yeah, I like that. Yet, not yet, Matt, but they will be, I think, eventually after they get more comfortable. And the thing is that, we all live in Missouri, apparently, the show me state, because show me the numbers from Austin, and maybe if I'm in Lubbock, I'm going to sort of be interested in those numbers. You know what I mean? In other words, so. Um, we have some, I think we have some confidence that the word will get around, that, hey, this is working for us in Austin, and it could work in Lubbock,
Mm-hmm.
or it could work, in Houston, um, and so, um, but I'll have to give it some thought about who
But I
specifically I would
didn't.
recommend.
I wanted to plant the seed. Obviously,
Yeah,
it's a long-term conversation. So
yeah,
thank you for giving me the opportunity to plant that question with you. Thank you.
yeah.
Robert.
Bob, thank you for all you're doing. There's several of us talking about trying to put together kind of a 3-year strategy or plan to get to a carbon fee, dividend, Social Security, payroll tax issue, and the carbon border adjustment mechanism. The circumstances that we have now, tariffs are foremost. That relates to the policy. Affordability relates to the dividend, Social Security issue, and that the debt issue always has related to the carbon fee concept as opposed to large scale regulation subsidy approaches. The CBAM is now in place in Europe, and we have Senator Whitehouse, Senator Kramer, and others working on something similar to that in the Senate. Has the strategy in some sense changed, possibly, where we need to focus more on that aspect and the lobbying and education and awareness to get the carbon border adjustment mechanism more into play while we mostly talk about the carbon fee? What's your take on the Congress and that over the next 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, I think you're onto something, which is the European tax. Well, you have to buy carbon credits, but it's essentially a tax that's going to be imposed on, so that everybody knows, starting in 2023, if you were exporting stuff into Europe, you had to report your emissions on your products. But starting in this year, you have to buy credits to offset those emissions, European credits. It's essentially a tax on the way in. It's essentially a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And so I think it's a light bulb moment where some manufacturers are going to be visiting with their members of Congress, and they're going to be saying, we're paying now to the Europeans essentially a tax that you could collect here. And we got to pay it anyway to the Europeans, and it doesn't matter to us or our customers because it's already going to be there in the price of our product. Would you rather have the money here or in Europe? And so that's the light bulb moment that we hope starts happening in the U.S. Capitol. And then the big light goes on at the top of the Capitol that says, hey, we could do that to China. And then that's when it starts really going. And yeah, I hope that the Foreign Pollution Fee Act, that's Senator Cassidy and Senator Graham have that one. I hope that's going to advance. It seems consistent with a tariff kind of mindset, except that the carbon border adjustment mechanism itself is we think, based on some experts that are quite knowledgeable about this stuff, that it is in a World Trade Organization compliant way that it can be done. Not so sure that the Foreign Pollution Fee Act meets that test, but there is a way to do a carbon border adjustment mechanism that does meet the test of the World Trade Organization. And then you're not engaged in a tariff war. You're just saying, listen, emissions anywhere are climate change everywhere. So we're going to charge for dumping into the trash dump of the sky, wherever it is you're dumping, because there's only one big dump, and it's the whole world's atmosphere. And so you got to pay, for space you're taking up. And so I think there's some real hope that the things like the European adjustment will start people thinking here in America.
We have about 3 minutes left, and so I'm going to let Larry Lynch, one of the two. We now have two of the three Larrys on this webinar. So, Larry, will you ask our last community question of Bob? And you're on mute, FYI.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm on my phone and it's a little tricky. Bob, thank you very much. Always good to see you and appreciate you making time and your just careful, measured approach to all these issues we're dealing with. I'm having lunch tomorrow with a leader in the anti-BES movement in Texas. He just happens to be somebody I'm in a Bible study with. And so the anti-BES movement is gaining a lot of grassroots traction. It's also supported by the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is basically controlled by oil and gas people. The key things I think for them, their concerns are that we're using Chinese software, and so China can shut down whatever part of the grid this touches. They feel like the batteries are unreliable, and they feel like we can't count on them, in the worst cases, which has been proven wrong recently, but that's their belief. And then there's a safety issue. They're concerned about the chemicals in the batteries and what happened at Moss Landing happening here. And so I'm putting together arguments. Larry Howe and I have been discussing this. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts about this particular thing that's going on at the grassroots level and this particular issue.
Yeah, well, Larry, the thing I'm confident of is when you're talking to them, you'll respect their concerns and say, yeah, all of those things you just listed are legitimate concerns. Now let's look at them and see if we can address them some way, because that's really all of those sound like legitimate concerns to me. But just because there is the risk, for example, in using technology that somebody's going to plant something in there that could blow up on you later. Well, what that tells me is, okay, then we need some security procedures to figure out what, in other words, to reverse engineer the stuff to make sure it's safe, right? And so we do need to be vigilant. And so what I would say is, in talking to them, is the first place, and I know this is where you'll start, is honoring and respecting their concerns, because that's the way of, then let us reason together, figure out how we can overcome those concerns, because we need to overcome them. It's like my phone today, I will tell you, was doing funny things. And it wasn't just me. It was the person I was trying to talk to said, "Oh, something funny going on the phone here." So it's something to be concerned about. Is it? But that doesn't mean I want to throw my phone away. I got to use that phone, and so yeah. It's just a great note to end on, I think, which is that idea of just making sure to, when people have a concern, to hear it and try to respect it and honor them and not dismiss them as idiots or something. I'm preaching to myself now. I know that Larry Linenschmidt doesn't need this sermon. I'm preaching to myself. So then we can get further with people, because there are ways to address each of those concerns.
Well, it is 2:30, and I want to let everybody get on with the rest of their day. And Bob included, you had a hard stop at 2:30. So thank you for this riveting conversation. And thank you for everyone participating and bearing with us last week when we postponed due to a plethora of storm-related reasons. So I don't know if Angela has any parting words for you. Angela, do you?
I just want to say thanks for joining us today and for all the great questions. And I always like to let everybody know that we'll be sending out a recording of today's meeting by email. Most likely that'll come to you tomorrow. so you can revisit the conversation or share that link with friends. Oatmeal metaphors and all. And I just want to say, we really appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, everybody. Great to
Thank
be
you,
with you.
everyone.
See ya.